For a lot of us, I think we've kind of had this thing that we learned, or something that we just sort of um, just kind of like through osmosis of culture, I don't know, sort of understood as the reality that's not true, is that somehow the Bible just kind of fell out of the air. It just kind of fell out of the sky. For some of us, maybe it's a grandma's coffee table. We think the Bible just like landed there, like sort of magically, and it just showed up. And so we have this idea and this view of it, that we don't really understand the context very often. And when we do that, we sort of look at the Bible and we say, well, these stories show up, and the way that we read them is we see them as these literal stories, and we take every little point out of them, and we end up turning them into science books or history books, or and we argue about that stuff. And when we do that, we completely miss the point of how the stories ended up there in the first place, which is the critical part. So the people in Jerusalem, the Jews in Jerusalem, 2,500 years ago, were taken captive. Their city was captured. It was destroyed. Their temple was destroyed. Everything was destroyed. And then the people were taken away from their city. They were marched 900 miles away from Jerusalem to go live in the city of Babylon. And somehow along that journey, and somewhere into that journey, as they were in Babylon, as they're surrounded by cultures, they're surrounded by different stories, they're surrounded by all kinds of different histories and different worship of different gods, these people begin to look at each other and they begin to say, it would probably be a good time for us to tell our story. We should probably sharing our shared history with each other, with our kids. We should talk about the God that we worship. We should deal with some of the questions we have, like how did we end up here? Why are we here? Who is this God that allowed this to happen to us? What do we do with the reality of the situation we're in? How do we treat the people around us? What do we do with our enemies that are the ones that brought us here? And so these questions that I have called, that I think of as existential questions, this is the reasons about our existence. Why? What are we doing here? These questions become so important that the people began to answer them with story, which is what all of us do. When we're faced with existential crisis, we tell ourselves stories, good or bad stories, but we tell ourselves stories. And so they began to tell these stories. Now, these stories had been around. They had been things that people had talked about for a long time. I love to think of the idea that they sat around fires, told them orally to each other. I imagine that some of them that were expert storytellers, you can imagine in villages and towns and cities, would stand up and say, hey, have you heard the one about? And somebody goes, no, I've never heard that one before. And the person begins to tell the story. And in those moments of stories are when people have these aha moments that they go, oh, so that's what our God is like. Or in those aha moments, they go, oh, that makes a lot more sense about where we are and what's going on in our situation that we find ourselves today. So as they did this is just huge because it gave them some answers that they were looking for. And again, this is how we get much of what we call the Bible today, particularly these stories. So last week we continued through these stories by looking at the story of two people named Abram and Sarah. And Abram and Sarah are huge in as far as the history in the Bible what matters. Normally we think of different couples that are sort of like the important couples of history. The first one that we dealt with a few weeks ago was Adam and Eve. After Adam and Eve are long gone, we get to Abram and Sarah. And their story that we looked at last week, we recognized that it was a critical story that these people told in exile because it helped them understand a couple things about themselves through their story. What we discovered were that Abram and Sarah, God had come to them and said, hey, I want to do something. I want to start a new nation of people. I want to bring together a family. And what I want to do is I want this family to be a people who will go out and they will become a great nation, and they will go and they will be a blessing to all of the other people of the world. And Abram's like, that sounds cool. I love that idea. I got a small problem. We don't have any kids. And we looked and we saw in this genealogy that was told about Abram and Sarah that there's a line in there that is a crucial line that says that Sarah was barren, which is just, she can't have kids. So as you're reading this story, the fascinating thing to me is as the people are telling this story and reading this story, and you're going through this genealogy, you're like, well, then there was this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, and this story is about Abram, by the way, and his wife Sarah, who, by the way, is barren. And somebody goes, excuse me, you're telling a genealogy. You say you're going to tell a story about these people who are going to become a great nation. They can't have kids. Why are you telling us a story about people where it doesn't seem like a family line is going to continue? For people in that day and age, these genealogies, this idea that your legacy was passed on through your children was huge, as it was in all of the ancient world. And so for this story just to throw this line in that nothing's going to happen, you're not going to have kids, you go, what's the point? Well, the exiles were asking the very same questions. They're sitting in Babylon going, do we have a future? Does anything happen after this? Is this where our line ends? If you were a parent, you would look at your kids and you would go, are my kids, these good Jewish boys and girls, going to marry into Babylonian families? Is my family line done? Is our faith and religion done? Is our culture over? That's what it looked like to them. And they said, so we have no future. So the question they begin to say is this God who we worshiped in Jerusalem concerned at all about our future here in Babylon? And that's exactly what the story of Abram and Sarah told them. As they leaned into the tension of these people can't have kids, they began to say, well, what did God do about them? God says he's going to make this great nation. What is all of this about? And it becomes this promise that God looks at them and says, no, you think that there is no future for you. I'm telling you, I have a future in mind. As we read that story, it was so fascinating to see that these people, Abram and Sarah, listened to God, they followed God, they walked out of their city, they went to this promised land that he had said he was giving to them to begin this nation. And they go in and they build some altars, they begin to worship, and then the story just, nothing happens. It just says that they waited. No kids show up and they just wait. No kids show up and they wait a little longer, and no kids show up and they wait some more. Now, we don't really know how old they're going to be at this point. The scriptures sometimes point to this idea that maybe they were like in their 70s or 80s. But if you look at it with a scholarship eye, you could see they were probably more in their late 30s or 40s, if you look at the numbers in a better way. And one of the interesting things about that is that they're reaching the stage that in our modern culture you would call a geriatric pregnancy, which is not a great term. I feel bad for ladies who get called geriatric pregnancies. But that is the term that you would use today. It would mean that this is a little more high risk. And so then if you take yourself and you go back into the ancient world, imagine how much more high risk it was for them. So Sarah's going, is this going to happen? Abram's going, can I make this happen? I don't think so. And they're having all kinds of questions about this. And finally, the dam kind of breaks. Abram's had enough. He looks at God and he says, what are we doing here? I'm still childless. You made this promise. Nothing is happening. He gets super ticked off. He says some things that he probably shouldn't have said. I'm going to get to it later on. That he says, if this is all it is, then an heir to my house is going to be this slave that's in my house. Just an ugly dehumanization of somebody in his house. God looks at him and says, Abram, come here. He takes him outside. I don't know what that looked like, but he takes him outside. He says, first of all, that slave is a man, but he's not going to be the heir of your house. Your house is going to be like all of these stars. Just look up and count them, if you can count them. This is the family that I'm going to give you. And you go, how is that even possible? As we followed along in the story, we saw some things about it that showed that later on, the Apostle Paul, who was a writer and a pastor, said that Abraham's promise was fulfilled through everybody who comes and follows Jesus. That he says, you are heirs now. What a cool way to connect all that, according to his promises. And so you are a part of this, that you are now to go out and be a blessing to this entire world. That as we bless others, as we bring the goodness and the grace and the love of God to this world, that we take part in that promise. The problem for Abram and Sarah is they couldn't see that. I mean, for all of us, when things get tough, we can't see the future. How many times in your life have you been at a point where like you thought that something was supposed to happen. You felt like it was a promise. You had like this idea, like this is the way things are supposed to go. It didn't happen. You were like, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And so in those moments, some of us, what we tend to do, and I don't know if you're like this, I'm like this, we sort of just take it into our own hands. And we're like, God, fine. You don't want to do it? I'll take care of it myself. If you don't believe in God, maybe you believe in fate. And you say, if fate's not going to take care of it, I'll just do it myself. And you just decide that I'm just gonna do this thing, I'm gonna make it happen. And here's what happens. Whether you are a follower of Jesus, whether you believe in God, whether you don't, when we do that kind of stuff, doesn't it seem like 9 times out of 10, it just goes bad? This is why like people are like, I don't need a contractor. I can build that kitchen out myself. I saw somebody yesterday. Guys, It was the greatest thing. I go into Menards, and I'm walking in to get some wood for a fire last night, and I'm walking in, and I see this truck. And have you ever noticed that truck beds are getting smaller and smaller and smaller? You can't fit nearly as much in them as you think you can, unless you're a dude. And then you think you can fit everything in them. I don't know why. And I see this couple, and they've got this gigantic piece of countertop. I mean, this thing is longer than I am. It's got to be like 10 feet. It's huge. And they're carting this out to their car, and they get to their truck, and I can see it. I can see it in her eyes. And she's trying to decide. It's right here. The I told you so is coming. And I'm looking at this going, man, if I stick around long enough, I'm not a counselor, but I could offer some services here. I could potentially, because I'm like, this is going to get really bad really quick. And you can just see it coming. And he's looking at the truck, and he's got that oh crap look in his eyes, like, what have I done? And I'm sort of imagining them driving down the road, and I know what's going to happen. Kurt, I know what's going to happen. I'm like, I can see it. They're going to hit a bump, and that thing's going to go, bah! And and she's going to go, I told you that was going to happen. He's going to go, well, I knew we could do it, right? And they're going to have, that's what happens to all of us. We think, I can fix the problem, I'll do it myself, and then all hell just breaks loose. We have to learn to trust the experts. Now, in the case of Abram and Sarah, I think the expert is supposed to be God in this case. That's the expert for them. Maybe in your case of your kitchen, it's your contractor. But in this story that we're going to continue reading, Abram and Sarah decide, we're done waiting. We're going to take care of business ourselves. We're going to make this happen. Now, in this story, Abram and Sarah sort of end up becoming like background characters now. A character named Hagar is sort of going to take the center place of this story. In her story, we're going to find all kinds of questions. We'll probably have an equal number of protests about how she's treated. We're not going to like it. But what we're going to see is that this story has something to show us about how the exiled people were thinking about life. Some of the things that they learned as they told this story, and also some things that we can learn from it today. So, Genesis 16, we're going to see the continuation here. Now, Sarah, Abram's wife, bore him no children. Well, we knew that. She was barren. The promise didn't seem to come fulfilled. Then it goes on. She had an Egyptian enslaved woman whose name was Hagar. Now, this is really interesting. I wanted to tell you something that I thought was cool. In the kids' class, they're learning the same story, and it's a hard story. There's a lot of questions here that are getting asked. And I'm sure the kids will have a lot of questions, but it's an important story to tell. But one of the things that they're talking about in there is that, and I love the NRSV version of this, that it calls her an enslaved woman. It doesn't call her a slave. That's not her identity. Her identity is Hagar, a woman who is enslaved. This has been done to her. This is not who she is. So I think that's a really interesting piece here, and I'm glad that our kids are learning that too. Your identity is who you are. And nobody else can force what they want upon you. So let's keep going. She had an Egyptian enslaved woman whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, you see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my enslaved woman. Yes, that means what you think it means. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. and Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her enslaved woman, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my enslaved woman to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on me. This is your fault," is what she's saying. What? And I know Abram is going, "This was your idea. You told me to do it." And she's like, "Well, it's your fault now." I mean, this is just like, this is a train wreck of like the grandest proportions. "May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarah, "Your enslaved woman is in your power. Do to her as you please." So Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Now, again, a lot is happening in this passage. There is a lot to unpack. So first of all, we see Abram and Sarah still waiting for the children that God had promised, right? Again, last week we looked at that promise God had given them. Let me read the passage. In Genesis 12:2, this is the promise that was given. "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." And again, as we explore the meaning of that promise, like I said earlier, we saw Abram's frustration when that went unfulfilled. And we got to see, and this is what's cool about these stories, is they gave us two sides. They sort of went back and they said, okay, episode 2 of this story, episode 1 is introducing Abraham and Sarah. Episode 2, we're going to show you Abram's side of the story. Now we're at episode 3. Now we're going to show you Sarah's side of the story. And what they want us to see is that these people get frustrated and angry. They're not happy with the situation at all. They feel like the promise isn't coming fulfilled. So in Sarah's frustration, and again, we talked about his last week. Now in Sarah's frustration, she seems to solve this problem in her own way by a very interesting practice. We look at it and we go, well, that seems odd. That seems like a little bit of a strange idea, but this was common in the ancient culture. The taking of a second wife was a normal thing, particularly if that second wife was going to serve as a surrogate mother for the family. Now, again, this surrogate motherhood, this idea was common in the ancient Near East. This wasn't seen as a form of adultery like we might initially read it. In fact, archaeologists have even found contracts for this. And this isn't just Sarah going, okay, I got an idea. This wasn't like they're sitting on the porch and they're sitting back and she goes, how are we going to figure this out? You know, if you had sex with that slave over there, that is not what is happening here. This is planned out. This is deliberate. This is literally contractual. And we know that because we found contracts like this in the ancient world. Even in the Code of Hammurabi, a well-known ancient document of law, it had in the code a description of this practice and the legal implications of what happens as a result of this practice, which is typically a child. And that child, according to this law, would belong to the wife, not the birth mother. That is why she says, we will solve this by getting this child, because what we're going to do is we are going to contractually make God agree to what we've done. Because this is a contract. And we're going to go to God and say, well, now she's pregnant, and according to the law, that child is mine. Gotcha, God. Loophole. We just fixed the plan. Now, again, we look and go, that's stupid. We know that it's not her child. We know that's not the promise that was given. That's what we think, but that's what they're working with. That's what their mindset is here. Again, this might seem odd to us, but for the Jewish exiles, they're sitting here and they hear the story and they go, makes sense to me. You know, Bill and Janet down the street, yeah, that's what they did. I mean, they literally know people who have these contracts and who have done this. They were living in a place where these arrangements were part of the legal and the social fabric of the times. Now, the reason I want to go into all this detail about this is because this goes into a lot of what I've been talking about over the last few weeks, and something I think is so important for us to understand. One, it's critical for us, like I talked about, to understand where these stories came from, that these are stories born out of exile. When we read them in context out of exile, it begins to change how we understand them. We begin to see them in a different light. We should read them as the audience who they were intended for was going to read them, right? That makes sense. The other thing is this phrase that I have been using, that the ancient people of the Bible breathe the ancient air of their ancient neighbors. The ancient people of the Bible breathe the ancient air of their ancient neighbors. Now that means that they breathe the ancient air in all kinds of ways. Cultural air. Stories that were told, that were similar stories. Laws and customs. All these things that we take for granted that are just a part of their culture. I mean, it is an expectation today that you're going to come here and you're going to wear, probably jeans and a shirt of some kind. Matt, if you showed up in a toga today to come and play the drums, it would be cool, but it'd be weird. I mean, we would probably look at you like because that's a cultural expectation that you're not going to walk into church and wear a toga. But like in the ancient world, if you walked in jeans and a shirt, people would look at you and be like, what is this demon man? Why does he look so awesome? Where do I buy those clothes? I mean, but this is cultural stuff, and that's what's happening here is. This is normalized to them because this was part of their culture. And this is why in the Bible we shouldn't be afraid of the parallels that we find. The myriad of parallels that connect to cultural parallels that are going on, stories that we're going to find that are very similar. Because what we're going to see is that as the ancient cultures around the people of the Scripture, as that intersected with the people of the Scriptures and the stories they wrote, we can start to make sense of what is happening in them. Again, this is a great reminder for us. The Bible is an ancient library with poems, stories, history, written through the lens of ancient people having ancient experiences. It did not just show up on a coffee table. And because of that, there are times we're going to find ancient practices, laws, expectations that show up in our stories. And here is why I want to make this point. It is our job, not my job, not just my job, all of our jobs, it is the interpretive job that we have to navigate that, to look at it, to do what we might call negotiate with the text, to try to understand the text, to look at it and say, okay, so what is going on here? What is cultural? What is happening? What can I learn from this? And then I think the most important thing we're supposed to come out of that is discover where the subversive and liberating themes of the good news are revealed within these cultural constraints. Because that's when it gets cool. When you start to read this stuff and go, man, that is ancient. That doesn't make sense. That feels like a tension to me. I don't like that part. Good. Where is the subversive good news threading itself through that? It's not going to come in full fulfillment. It's going to be just there a little bit. You're going to start to see some of the freeing themes of the good news of Jesus start to reveal themselves in these little just little tiny ways that make you go, oh, that is significant. And I think that that's a reality that we see in the Bible that's so critical. Again, these people are in culture that they're going, this doesn't make sense. This is so ugly. This custom doesn't make sense. This feels gross. I can't believe that it was normalized and that God, how dare God work through people that have enslaved people in their house? Like that's the first thing we say is this is gross. Why would God do that? Well, that was the world. And it's gross. It is gross. And we should call it for what it is. But as we read the stories, what we find these little freeing moments where all of a sudden, like last week, Abram says in his anger, he calls him this slave. And all of a sudden God says, this man won't be your heir. As a man. It's not a piece of your property, Abram. That's huge. That's freeing. That's good news. And I think what's cool is we're going to find the same thing here as we take a look at this story and see what happens. Let's go on. So in 16:2, we go back to this. She says, "Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." Now again, super provocative statement. As I told someone last night, a friend of ours is a librarian, and she says all these people want to ban all these books, and she's always getting these recommendations from people about what books she should ban in the public school library. And I said, "Would you have any Bibles?" And she said, we do. We have several. If I'm going to have the Bible, I'm going to have all the religious texts." And I said, "Well, good luck getting all the religious texts, right?" And I said, "Well, next time that somebody tells you that well, we shouldn't have these books that are so terrible and so awful," I'm like, just remind them that the Bible is filthy. It is super, super filthy. And if they don't believe you, go to this text where this woman says, "Go into my servant." And if they're like, "What does that mean?" It means what you think it means. It's exactly what's going on here. It's a super provocative statement, but it's also, again, legal language for a path forward for her to obtain children when God's promise seems delayed. The phrase she used, "obtain children by her," is literally the technical legal terminology that we find in the other ancient sources. But what happened, again, as a result of her following this path, laid the groundwork for what's to come. So listen again. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked at contempt with her mistress. And we don't know there who's who. It's very confusing language. Who's looking at contempt? Is Hagar looking at contempt at Sarah, or Sarah looking at Hagar? We don't really know. We just know somebody's done ticked off everybody, and they're all in a big mess. Then Sarah gets mad. She says, "May the wrong be done to me be on you. I gave my enslaved woman to your embrace. When she saw she conceived, she looked at contempt on me. May the Lord judge between you and me." And then Abram says, "Well, do whatever you want. I'm out. I just did what I was told." So Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Now, well, the Bible doesn't always say explicitly when something is wrong. I think we have the ability to recognize the harmful behavior when we see it. Sarah's treatment of Hagar is just that. It's wrong. And it was so severe that it caused a woman who felt she had no choice to run away. And again, not just a woman, a pregnant woman who said, "It would be better for me to go off into the wilderness and put my life and this child's life at risk." And this is a place we have to wrestle with. How does that feel? You see, when we read through the Bible through the lens of people wrestling with the experiences that they had with God and with each other, we need to pause and feel the good and the bad. This is not a feel-good story. This is an awful story. She runs out in the wilderness and she goes, "It would be better for me to go out there. Maybe I'll die, but it's better than being with Sarah and Abram." See, when we do that, we can see Sarah's mistreatment of Hagar was a violation against her as a human being. It caused Hagar to feel unseen, to feel disposable, which reminds us why this story was told. Again, remember the people in exile? This would have felt familiar to them. They felt unseen. They felt forgotten. They felt cast aside. That like God had said, "You're living in Jerusalem, everything's cool, but I'm just going to ignore it all. Babylon's going to come in, they're going to take you, they're going to enslave you, they're going to force you to march to their city, and I'm not going to do a thing about it." And these people go, "What kind of God is that?" They're asking questions like they're struggling with what to do in these moments. So as they're telling this story, they sit there and they go, "What do I do with a God who feels far away? What do I do with a God who feels like he isn't fulfilling his promises? What do I do with a God who ignores mistreatment?" Then as they sat in the tension, the storyteller continued and revealed the twist that always happens. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to shore. And he said, "Hagar, enslaved woman of Sarah, where have you come from? And where are you going?" She said, "I am running away from my mistress Sarah." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be numbered for multitude." Wait. Whose? I will so greatly multiply your offspring. God says, I'm not I don't have to follow their stupid law. I'm not going to go along with this loophole. Hagar, this is your child. Nobody else's child. Enough stuff has been done to you. And the reality is now I see you. What a huge shift. What a huge change. And then she says, can you imagine Abram? Comes to Abram and says, hey, you know that promise that I gave you? I'm also going to give it to her. It was for me. No, I'm going to give it to her too. She deserves it. I don't know. Abram and Sarah, maybe the slave woman? What? No. The promise is for her too. Now, there's a little bit of this kind of thread coming through here. The reality that God has blessed all the children of the world. We start to see this reminder that everybody is made in the image of God, that God is for everyone. What a great picture to see just here. So, as the story ends here, and it goes on, it says, and the angel of the Lord said to her, now you have conceived, shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael. For the Lord has given heed to your affliction. So she named the Lord who spoke to her, and she says, you are the God who sees. The translation here is that this is a God who sees her. And then she says, have I really seen God and remained alive after seeing him? So I saw God and God sees me. Now, this statement at the end of the story is so incredibly profound when you pause and look at the progression. Listen to this. God sees Hagar when others render her invisible. God speaks directly to her, asking about her situation, and listens to her. Hagar then does the most audacious thing she could have possibly done, which is names God, the God who sees me. Now, I want us to understand this because this is extraordinary what just happened. Hagar was an enslaved foreign woman. All three of those things in the text are going against her. Enslaved foreign woman. She would literally, in the ancient world, be marginalized 3 times over. And yet, she becomes the first person in all of Scripture to give God a name. This enslaved woman, at the bottom of the social hierarchy, on the verge of death, had such a profound encounter with God that she had the audacity to give this God a name. And the writer had the audacity to tell the story like that. It's crazy. Now look, God didn't remind her. He didn't say, excuse me. Cultural convention says that you cannot name me. We have rules and laws about this. Did you check with the bosses first? He just accepts the name. And then he blessed her. And in that moment was saying, that those on the margins are the ones that God sees. I mean, revolutionary. In any ancient story, her story ends that she runs away with this child. Maybe somehow Abram and Sarah go back and they get their child back. The thing is fulfilled the way it's supposed to be fulfilled, and things go on, right? I mean, that's how the story is supposed to read. And instead, the story flips everything on its head. And it says, no, these characters that you thought were the good guys are actually the bad guys. Well, it's complicated. And they say, and this character that you don't think is supposed to matter actually is the central character, and she matters so much. And then takes it even further, and she says, and I'm going to name this God. I'm going to take the power to do it. Now, last week, we saw Abram dehumanize Eliezer. We saw that God subtly corrected Abram in a way that gave worth to people who are overlooked. And again, we see the same pattern here. Do you see what's going on? These two stories are saying that no, we're not going to allow people to be made invisible. We're not going to ignore people. God saw her worthy of divine attention and promise. And he saw Eleazar as divine and worthy of promise. And this shouldn't go unnoticed because it ties in directly with the promise that God gave Abram. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And the tension of this story, the tension of these two stories, is found that the promise, the tension is found that the promise given to Abram and Sarah, that the actions of them don't match up with the promise that was given to them. The actions of Abram and Sarah towards people don't match up with the promise they had. You will be a blessing to all people. And Abram says, I don't think so, not everybody. You will be a blessing to all people. And Sarah says, I don't know, I'm not sure about everybody. And the storyteller says, then let's tell a story here. Let's correct your mistake, because you will be a blessing to all people. You don't get to pick and choose who God sees. And for the exiles, again, this is a question that they were wrestling with. What do we do about these people that have captured us? What do we do about these enemies who took us all the way to Babylon? I don't want to see them. I don't want God to see them. I don't want anything good for them. I hope their city is destroyed too. But in the middle of that exile, there was a prophet named Jeremiah. He told them this thing that's just so hard to hear. He said, guys, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Ew. Do what now? And then he says, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. He says, these aren't just distant people anymore. These are your neighbors. These are the people who live next door. These are the people all around you. You will be a blessing to them. You have been placed in a situation where you get to now fulfill the promise that has been given to you. Now, maybe there's some people in your life that you're like, I don't want God to bless those people. I don't want anything to do with those people. And then you look and you go, oh, God put them right next door. God put them in the next office. God put them down the street. What am I supposed to do now? See, the exiles weren't just supposed to survive Babylon, but live out the call Abram had been given to bless their neighbors, their enemies who had conquered them. And to do that, and I think this is what's critical, to do that would take a lot more strength than fighting, because it meant seeing them not as enemies, but as family, fully human and made in the image of God. The story also gave them a unique look at a character who was unlike them, but who shared a similar story to them. And I think this is powerful because it's often in the empathy with those most unlike us that we learn to see ourselves in new ways. It's most oftentimes when we have the empathy to look at somebody who's completely different than us that we can begin to see ourselves in a different way. Through Hagar, the exiles heard about a God who sees others, whom others often overlook, who heard the cries of the displaced, who creates hope in the wilderness. And in the unexpected story of Hagar, they could see themselves and find hope that God was still walking with them. If God is willing to walk with her, if God can see her, then man, I guess God can actually see me. And so then another thing we can learn here, the thing that we kind of come to the conclusion of is this, that I think this leaves a whole bunch of questions for you and me about how we live our lives. Whose stories are we overlooking? Who around us might be encountering God in powerful ways, and we're missing it because of our own prejudice? Another question would be this: have we bought the lie that God doesn't see us in our experience? And to answer this as a pastor who loves everybody in this room, no matter how invisible others might make you feel, no matter how much your worth has been questioned or dismissed, you are always seen by a God who loves you. No matter how invisible, no matter how much your worth has been questioned, you are always seen by a God who loves you. And if that's true for you, it's time for you to live that out with your neighbors. Your story matters, and their story matters. Your experience of God matters, and their experience of God matters. And hearing that story is something every one of us needs to hear. This week, we're going to close up. I'm going to invite Maddie and Kurt to come up. I'm pretty proud of our band. I think you guys know this if you've been looking at social media. Our band here at Southeast released their first song. And you can find this song on Apple, and it's on Spotify. It's pretty much anywhere that you get music. And one of the beautiful things about this song is that it goes along with these two messages that I've just preached over the past 2 weeks. That it reflects on some things that we've been learning today, which is something that shows up over and over and over again in these stories. And that is this: that part of being a part of this community that follows the way of Jesus is being people who see the innate value in all people. To see the image of God in everyone we encounter. These stories, that's exactly what they're telling us. They're saying, God sees these people. It is your responsibility as people who have been called to bless others to also see these people, to see their value, to see their goodness, to see people the way that God sees people. What an incredible reality, as we close up, what an incredible reality of this thing about Hagar, an enslaved foreign woman. That's what she was to everybody else. And God says, no, I see you. That's who I see. The band put it this way: God is found in the people we ignore. God is found in the destitute and the poor. The sick, the hurt, the lost, the lonely, the mourning, and the meek all reveal your presence if we just had eyes to see. There you are. God, you walk among us. There you are with your sons and your daughters. There you are, and I love this prayer: God, help us see your face in every precious child you've made. That is awesome. God, we thank you for these stories. We thank you for this song. We thank you for the way that you remind us to see value in everybody. That this story reminds us that this woman who was so mistreated, who runs away, that her story doesn't end there. That you go running after her. That you find her in the wilderness and you remind us that her story matters. And in that we see that all stories of all people matter. And we see that we matter to you as well. So Father, help us to continue to lean into your love. And as we do that, share that love with those around us. In your name we pray. Amen.